I recently got all these romance novels, mostly at thrift stores and places like that. And I was just going to run through all of them, if we can. And we're going to start out with Rosemary Rogers, Sweet Savage Love, and The Wildest Heart. I got both of these yesterday. I already had The Wildest Heart, but my copy had a printing defect on it, where it didn't print the last page. This one I looked and it had the last page printed. Sweet Savage Love, I believe, was her first book. As you can see, it has this copy has the little folded cover, unfortunately. Maybe a better copy will show up at some point. But this book was published January 1974, although this is the 35th printing of it. And Rosemary Rogers was, along with Kathleen Woodwis and Laurie McBain and others, was one of the Avon ladies, what they were called, who were did paperback originals for Avon books that were wildly successful, sold millions of copies, and really set the template for the modern historical romance novel. And Rosemary Rogers passed away about a year or so ago, I believe. Now, Laurie McBain only wrote 7 books between the mid-70s to around 1985. And this is one of the early ones, maybe her second one, Devil's Desire. Moonstruck Madness. Yeah, so this was April 1975. It's 18th printing. Already over 1 million copies in print, though, at this point. There's the front cover. The back cover there. Has that red edge and the very much looking like The Flame and the Flower by Kathleen Woodwis, to really sell the brand of these Avon romances, historical romances, to readers. So I'm only missing, she only wrote 7 books, I'm only missing 2 more to have all of Laurie McBain's books. Now this was, I think I'd seen this at the thrift store last time, Cousin Suzanne by Myrna Blythe. It's also an Avon book with the red edge, a little rough condition, but I wasn't sure if it was a romance or not. Sometimes books, especially from Avon, I'd mentioned in a previous video how Frances Parkinson Kai's, her books were published by Avon in the late 60s, early 70s, and they look like romance novels, the way that the covers are done, but technically are not. They don't really, they're not really romance novels per se. But this had, it's kind of rough condition, like I said. This came out in July 1976, so it was part of that whole movement. It has a similar sort of cover design. But this has an interesting intro here. I am the eye of this story, but not its most important character. I am about midway in importance between most and least, a position I have often assumed. I am confidant and chorus, friend and reporter, adviser and explicator, part of the scene, but at the frazzled far end of the picture. Personally, I have trouble taking center stage. So, interesting writing style there. Now, when I saw this at the thrift store yesterday, I was very excited to see Janet Louise Roberts. I've started getting her books. Now, she wrote in the 70s and early 80s. I believe she passed away in the early 80s. Black Horse Tavern, published by Pocket Books in 1980, I believe. Let's take a look. Yeah, May 1980, although it's copyright 1972, so it is a reprint of an earlier book. It has a number 13 in the corner there, which implies that it's part of a series. It does say on the side here, Pocket Goth, so it's a gothic novel, which she wrote a lot of. I've only read one of her books so far, and it was a Regency, published by Dell in the 1970s. And so we have another book here, Bonds of Love, by Lisa Gregory, published by Jove. And the interesting thing about this book is it's actually, as the copyright info reveals Candace Camp. This was her first book. Very successful historical romance novels. June 1978 is when this book came out. And there's a closer look at the cover art. And the back cover there. Yeah, so this just happened. I didn't even know it was Candace Camp when I bought it yesterday. And we have published by Pinnacle Books, an early Pinnacle book, Paula Fairman, Passion's Promise. And she had I don't know much about the author at all, but there were a series of books that looked like this. They had this sort of cover. It's like a historical type book. And this one is from February 1983. Other bestsellers by Paula Fairman. Now this is also a Pinnacle book. I only got this for $1 yesterday at the used bookstore. This was published by Pinnacle Books in 1990, I believe, by Dawn Aldridge Poor. Pinnacle Books are published by Windsor Publishing, but I believe they were still, from the beginning, I thought they were from Kensington, who does Zebra books. This is October 1990. In fact, I think there's an insert here for a Zebra's historical romance line. Yeah. The publisher's a Zebra. So Pinnacle is still an imprint of Kensington, which also Zebra Books is also an imprint of Kensington. These days you'll see Kensington, you'll see Zebra, contemporary romance and historical romance. But Pinnacle Books, you'll see that little logo. Here's the cover. You'll see that Pinnacle logo there. Well, in fact, I have one here. Western novels. So there's the Pinnacle. So they publish a lot of Westerns these days. Not so much romance. They leave the Zebra books to do the romance books. Anyways, a very thin book, and it looks really interesting. I like having publishing companies that I can investigate what they've published. So here's some more 1990s, 1980s historical romance. This is Karen Robards, an early Karen Robards, published by Leisure Books, Forbidden Love. And this edition is from January 1990, but it's originally from 1983. And I think her first book came out in 1981. Nowadays she writes like thriller type books, but back then it was all about the historical romance. And this is by Renee J. Garrett. This is one of those Zebra hologram, lovegram line. And let's see, it was Zebra, Kensington, June 1991. This one takes place in Massachusetts in 1881. It has a very shiny cover. Desert Ecstasy by Connie Mason. This was published, let's see, by Leisure maybe? Let us see, yeah, Leisure Books. 1988. Desert Ecstasy. This is a book called Highland Moon by Judith E. French. It was published by Avon in, I think, 1991 or so. Let's see. 1991, July 91. And apparently this is the second book of her Indian Moon trilogy. That's what it says there. There's the back of it. And then we have Janelle Taylor, Wild Sweet Promise. This is published by Bantam Books. In 1989, it looks like April 1989. And she thanks Jennifer Blake in the in the credits there. And now we have some Marion Chesney books. I got these for $1 each at the used bookstore yesterday. The Paper Princess. This is part of the Fawcett traditional Regency line. This was a Signet book, although it was originally released by Jove, I believe, in 1979. And then Signet released it as part of their Signet Regency line in the 1980s. Late 80s, I believe. And then you can tell that this is a later edition because it says coming in February 1995. So this probably came out about January 95. And this one has a complicated history. Mary Chesney wrote Regencies as Jenny Tremaine for Dell's Candlelight series around 1979, 1980. And then in 1987, Dell, this is still the publisher here, Dell did reprints of these to sort of capitalize on Marion Chesney's name. It now said Marion Chesney, writing as Jenny Tremaine, and it's a reprint of one of those Candlelight Regencies. Here are two Harlequin historicals. They're both medievals by Margot McGuire and Deborah Simmons. This is a very nice cover. There's the back cover there. Here's two anthology books. This one's Avon Books presents Timeless Love with stories by various authors, including Laurie Copeland. There we go. And this one was published by Harlequin. 3 new stories, Friends, Families, Lovers. Stories by Kathleen Eagle, Sandra Kitt, and Ruth Jean Dell. This came out in, I believe, 93 or so. Yep, 1993. There's the stories. Now here's a Harlequin romance, the original 1949 line. This was the number 33, it says in the corner. Hard to see there. But that is the subscription line, which started in the late 1980s. And so it ran concurrently with the regular Harlequin romance line that had a much higher book number. And I believe they were just available to subscribers, so you couldn't get them in stores. So book number 33. I also have book 34 actually too. And we'll just run through some of these. Here's some Harlequin Super Romance from the 1980s. And some more Harlequin Romance. Vicki Lewis Thompson there. Barbara Kay and Dawn Stewardson. So these have great covers. These were by the early 90s. They'll say on the side there, this was 1992. And shortly after this, they changed the cover format, so it didn't look like that. And we have 2 Harlequin Presents by Ann Mather, who was one of the launch authors of this line in 1973, I believe, or 4, something like that. And this is book number 278 by Ann Mather. Apollo Seed. This one is from January 80. It was the air she had forgotten, its softness and clarity, the translucent light that made the colors more vivid and the contrast more pronounced. It goes on from there. It's interesting writing. I've read one of her novels, and she's still alive as far as I know. Ann Mather, British writer. Kate Hewitt. I've read one of her novels just last month. But this one was from 2018. In fact, she has a book that just came out from Harlequin Presents that you can get at Walmart and places like that. She writes regularly for the line, has done so for the past 12 years, something like that. But she also writes, other books as well. And I believe she's an American writer that lives in England. And 2 books by Glenna Finley. Actually, these have the numbers on the back of them. That's book number 19 and book number 20. Glenn Finley, all her books for Signet, or most of them anyway, in the 1970s have this sort of cover design. And I believe that they were romantic suspense. I don't know much about Glenn Finley, though. I know she wrote a nurse novel, I believe, for Candlelight Romance back in around 1967, and maybe some other publishers back in the 60s. But then Signet, by the 1970s, Signet started this this Glenn Finley line, which I think ran like 30 some books. Another author with a line was Bantam Romance Emily Loring. This is book number 4, but this is actually one that came out in originally 1954, but she actually died like in 51. So this is one of the posthumous books. They had a ghostwriter continue writing Emily Loring books for years to come. So like half of her output almost is not even written by her. But I guess they did it because her name was such a big seller. She was such a popular writer. And we have 2 Harlequin intrigues here from the 1990s. This one, Rebecca York, Talons of the Falcon, is actually a reprint of a 1987, I believe, Dell book. But Rebecca York had been popular with Harlequin intrigue readers in the 90s for I believe it's called 43 Light Street series. So this was to capitalize on the popularity of Rebecca York. They reprinted those earlier Dell books, I guess. So Talons of the Falcon was the first in the Peregrine connection. And then I don't know anything about this author, Jenna Ryan, but The Woman in Black. I grabbed it because the thrift store actually had a ton of these Harlequin intrigues, but this cover looked interesting. And we have a reprint of A Candlelight Ecstasy by Lillian Cheatham. This came out in 1987, but is a reprint of one of the earliest Candlelight romances, book number 4. There's a brand new cover for it. So it's an alternative to getting the actual original first printing. And that's the second printing. And speaking of reprintings, Janet Daly wrote this, I believe, for Silhouette Special Edition number 150, I think it was, in 1984. And then Pocket Books, which is the parent company, Simon & Schuster, originally owned Silhouette. Pocket Books reprinted that Silhouette Special Edition because by now that line belonged to Harlequin. They reprinted that book just as its own standalone novel. Janet Daly, and we have Lindsay McKenna. This book is a special edition, Silhouette Special Edition, Dawn of Valor. And this book is published by Silhouette, Harlequin, as actually a collection of 3 of her other Silhouette books. It collects Heart of the Wolf, The Rogue, and Commando. Now, I actually have The Rogue. I had bought this a couple weeks ago. So this is what the Rogue actually looks like in its original printing. But this has the Rogue and 2 other books that are part of this series. And we have a Silhouette Intimate Moments by Nora Roberts, The Calhoun Women. Sandra Brown, Long Time Coming. This is a more recent reprint of a Love Swept novel that she had written back around 1989. I actually have a different edition of this book, but this one looks cooler and nicer. This was part of an action romance line. It's hard to see there, but this Silhouette Bombshell. This is book number 6. So even though it looks like the Alias TV show, it's not. That's just the name of the book. And Susan Grant, the Scarlet Empress. This was part of a series that was called 2176. And she wrote the first book and the last book. This is book number 5. The bookstore put that number on it. And again, it's an action romance from Love Spell, which was Dorchester, I believe, Leisure Books. Let's check. Yeah, Dorchester, 2004. And some more recent historical romances I bought at thrift stores recently. This came out a few years ago. And I bought this Lindsay Sands, which is like a paranormal romance. And then these thrillers by Shiloh Walker. And I don't know much about them. I just bought them because they were cheap. So they looked interesting, so I thought I'd check them out. And not romance, but I recently bought these at a thrift store too. They had a whole bunch of Star Trek novels from the 1970s and early 80s. So these were published by Bantam Books. And I had seen a YouTube video about these recently. So when I saw them at the bookstore, they were only like $3 each. But I'll get them. So that's that. That's my pile of books now. Thanks for watching.